The dust had barely settled on the boardwalk when Beatrice Rawlins stepped off the stagecoach, her once fine dress now travel-worn, and her reputation in even worse condition. Whispers followed her like shadows as she made her way through the town of Copper Creek, a place she'd sworn never to return to after fleeing 5 years earlier with dreams of fame and fortune that had soured into something unrecognizable. The year was 1878, and the western frontier was still wild enough that a woman could reinvent herself or destroy herself with equal measure. Beatrice had managed to do both. "Well, I'll be damned," came a gravelly voice from the doorway of the general store. "If it ain't the Rawlins girl, back from the big city." Beatrice kept her eyes forward, clutching her small carpetbag tighter. The town hadn't changed much, still the same dusty Main Street lined with false-fronted buildings, still the same judging eyes watching from windows and porches. What had changed was her. She made her way to the small boarding house at the edge of town, where Mrs. Holloway had always taken in travelers. The older woman's eyes widened when Beatrice appeared on her doorstep. "Beatrice Rawlins, Mrs." Holloway said, not unkindly but with surprise evident in her voice. "I heard you were making a name for yourself in San Francisco." "I made something of myself there," Beatrice replied, her voice steady despite the shame burning in her chest. "I need a room if you have one available, Mrs." Holloway hesitated only briefly before nodding. $2 a week, includes breakfast. No gentlemen callers after dark, and church on Sundays is expected." Beatrice handed over the money without argument, though it left her with precious little. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the back garden. She sat on the edge of the bed, unpinned her hat, and finally allowed herself a moment of weakness, shoulders slumping as she examined her raw, chapped hands once soft and adorned with fine rings, now bearing the marks of her fall from grace. She'd come back to die or to be reborn. She hadn't decided which yet. The following morning, Beatrice rose early. She donned her one remaining respectable dress, navy blue with only minimal mending along the hem, and set out toward the center of town. Her father's ranch had been sold years ago after his death, and she had nothing left here except memories. But she needed work, and quickly, before the last of her money ran out. Copper Creek had grown in her absence. There was now a proper bank, a second saloon, and the railroad had finally come through, evidenced by the small station at the far end of town. She passed by Doherty's saloon, averting her eyes. She'd spent enough time in establishments like that, though of a much higher caliber, in San Francisco. Those days were over. The general store seemed the most logical place to start. Mr. Peterson had always been fair-minded, even if his wife was the biggest gossip in 3 counties. As she pushed open the door, the bell jingled overhead, and 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Mr. Peterson stood behind the counter, spectacles perched on his nose. Mrs. Peterson was arranging fabric bolts, and leaning against the counter, tall and imposing in a worn leather vest, was a man Beatrice had never seen before. "Miss Rawlins," Mr. Peterson greeted her with only the slightest hint of surprise. "Welcome home." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I was wondering if you might be in need of help around the store." She kept her voice steady, dignified, though she felt anything but. "I'm good with numbers and have experience with mercantile goods." Mrs. Peterson's mouth pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. "Well, we've just hired young Billy Morgan," Mr. Peterson cut in apologetically, "but I hear the Silver Spur might be looking for help." "They've expanded since you left." The Silver Spur, the new saloon. Beatrice felt her hopes sink. She'd sworn never to step foot in another saloon, not after what had happened in San Francisco, but beggars couldn't be choosers, and she was certainly begging. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "I appreciate the information." As she turned to leave, the stranger straightened up. He was taller than she'd first realized, with broad shoulders and a face that had weathered the elements but remained handsome in a rugged way. His eyes, a startling shade of green, assessed her with interest rather than judgment. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Grant Lockhart. I've got work at my ranch if you're interested." Beatrice paused, studying him. His clothes were worn but well kept, his boots expensive. A rancher, then, and seemingly a successful one. "What kind of work?" she asked cautiously. "Housekeeper. My last one left to get married. It's room and board plus $15 a month," he shrugged. "It's honest work. Honest work." The word stung more than he could know. "Where's your ranch, Mr. Lockhart?" "North of town, about 5 miles. The Crescent Moon." Beatrice considered her options. She could try the Silver Spur, where the pay might be better but where she'd be right back where she started. Or she could take this stranger's offer, isolate herself at her ranch, and try to rebuild something of her former self. "I'll take it," she said decisively. "When would you like me to start?" Grant Lockhart's expression betrayed a hint of surprise, as though he hadn't expected her to accept so readily. "I'm heading back this afternoon. You can ride with me if you're ready by then." "I'll be ready." Beatrice nodded, already calculating what few possessions she'd need to pack. 3 o'clock in front of the livery, he said, then turned back to Mr. Peterson to finish whatever business had brought him to town. Beatrice left the store, the weight on her shoulders slightly lighter. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. And maybe out at the Crescent Moon, away from the judging eyes of Copper Creek, she could begin to forget what she'd done and who she'd become. She spent the morning collecting her meager belongings and settling her account with Mrs. Holloway, who seemed unsurprised by her quick departure. "A housekeeper at the Crescent Moon." The older woman raised an eyebrow. "Grant Lockhart keeps to himself mostly. Came here about 3 years back, bought old man Wilson's place. Turned it around too. It's one of the most prosperous spreads in the county now." "What else do you know about him?" Beatrice asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Holloway folded her arms. "He's unmarried, if that's what you're asking. Around 35, I'd guess. Doesn't come to town much except for supplies or to ship cattle. Some say he was a gunslinger before he turned to ranching, but that might just be talk. People like their stories." Beatrice nodded, filing the information away. A former gunslinger wasn't ideal, but then again, she was hardly in a position to judge anyone's past. At 3 o'clock sharp, she stood in front of the livery stable with her carpetbag and a small bundle of provisions she'd purchased from Peterson's store. Grant Lockhart arrived with a wagon rather than riding horseback, which was a relief. Beatrice hadn't been on a horse in years. He helped her up onto the seat without comment, then climbed up beside her and flicked the reins. The wagon rolled forward, and Beatrice felt the eyes of townspeople following them. Let them look, she thought defiantly. Let them talk. She was beyond caring what Copper Creek thought of her. They traveled in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clop of hooves on the hard, packed road. Finally, Grant spoke. "Been away a long time." 5 years, Beatrice replied, keeping her eyes on the horizon. "San Francisco." She turned to look at him sharply. "How did you know that?" he shrugged. "Small town. Word gets around." "And what word is that, Mr. Lockhart?" The question came out more bitter than she'd intended. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Just that you left to seek your fortune and came back without it. No different from half the folks who went west." His tone held no judgment, just a matter of fact acceptance that somehow made her feel both better and worse. "Well, that's one way of putting it," she murmured. They lapsed into silence again. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills covered with tall grass, the occasional stand of cottonwood trees, and in the distance, mountains that looked like sleeping giants against the sky. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that Beatrice had forgotten during her years in the city. "The job's not complicated," Grant said after a while. "Cooking, cleaning, mending. I've got 3 hands working for me, and they take their meals in the bunkhouse, but you'll be expected to cook for them too. Sundays are yours to do as you please. You can go to town if you want, though I don't make the trip often." "I understand," Beatrice said. "I'm not afraid of hard work." Something in her tone must have caught his attention, because he looked at her more carefully this time. "No, I don't imagine you are." As they crested a small rise, the Crescent Moon Ranch came into view. A large 2-story house stood in a grove of cottonwoods, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings nearby. The house itself was well maintained, with a wide porch wrapped around the front and sides. A windmill turned lazily behind the barn, and cattle grazed in the distance. "It's lovely," Beatrice said, genuinely impressed. "It's home," Grant replied simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. He pulled the wagon up in front of the house and helped her down. The front door opened, and a young man stepped out, hardly more than a boy, really, with a shock of red hair and freckles across his sunburned face. "This is Danny," Grant said. "He helps around the house sometimes when he's not working with the horses. Danny, this is Miss Rawlins. She's our new housekeeper." Danny nodded shyly. "Madam, please call me Beatrice," she said with a small smile. "Danny, take Miss Rawlins's things up to the housekeeper's room, would you?" Grant instructed. "Then you can get back to the barn. That new mare still needs work." The boy eagerly grabbed Beatrice's bags and disappeared into the house. "I'll show you around," Grant said, gesturing for her to follow him inside. The interior of the house was surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor rancher. The furniture was solid and of good quality, the floors were polished wood covered with woven rugs, and there were even curtains at the windows. It was clean, if somewhat Spartan. "Dining room," Grant said, pointing to a room with a large oak table that could seat 8. "Kitchen's through there. Parlor here." He moved efficiently through the house, showing her the downstairs rooms before leading her up a wide staircase. "My room," he said, nodding toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. "There's a small study next to it. The other rooms are empty except for this one." He pushed open a door to reveal a pleasant bedroom with a single bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the yard and corral. "This is yours." The room was 3 times the size of her accommodations at Mrs. Holloway's and far more comfortable than anything she'd had in the last year in San Francisco. "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched by the unexpected luxury. "Get settled in," Grant said. "Supper's usually at 6. Nothing fancy. We can discuss the particulars of meals tomorrow. Tonight, you're still a guest." With that, he left her alone in her new room. Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the clean quilt. For the first time since returning to Copper Creek, she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe here, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues, she could begin to rebuild her life. Maybe here, she could begin to forgive herself. The next few days established a routine that Beatrice found both challenging and comforting. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Grant and the ranch hand's Danny, who she learned was only 16. Hank, a weathered cowboy in his 50s with a perpetually sour expression but a surprisingly kind heart, and Miguel, a skilled horseman from Mexico who spoke little but smiled often. After breakfast, the men would head out to their various tasks, and Beatrice would begin her work cleaning, mending, preparing the midday meal and then dinner in the evening. The work was hard but honest, and she found herself sleeping better than she had in years, exhausted but satisfied. Grant himself remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite but reserved, spending most daylight hours working alongside his men. In the evenings, he often retreated to his study after dinner, emerging only to bid her good night before retiring to his room. Occasionally, she would catch him watching her with those intense green eyes, a question in them that he never voiced aloud. A week into her employment, Beatrice was in the kitchen kneading dough for the next day's bread when Grant appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "I need to ride into town," he said. "Anything you need while I'm there." Beatrice wiped her hands on her apron. "Some more coffee would be good, and perhaps some cinnamon if Mr. Peterson has any." Grant nodded. "I should be back by supper." After he left, Beatrice finished the bread and set it to rise. With a few hours before she needed to start dinner, she decided to explore the house more thoroughly. She'd been too busy with her duties to do more than cursory cleaning of the unoccupied rooms. The first 2 bedrooms were sparsely furnished but well kept. The third, however, seemed different. When she opened the door, she found a room that had clearly been occupied at one time. There was a rocking chair by the window, a bookshelf filled with volumes, and a quilt on the bed that had been carefully made. Unlike the other unused rooms, there was no dust here. Someone had been maintaining it. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of a young woman with a gentle smile and eyes that reminded Beatrice startlingly of Grant's. Next to it was a small wooden box. Curiosity overcame her better judgment, and she opened it to find a wedding ring and a folded piece of paper. She had just unfolded the paper, a letter, written in a flowing feminine hand, when she heard the front door open downstairs. Quickly, she replaced everything exactly as she'd found it and slipped out of the room, her heart pounding. It wasn't Grant returning early, but Danny coming in to fetch a tool from the storage room off the kitchen. "Miss Beatrice," he said, nodding politely. "Boss get off to town all right?" "Yes," she replied, trying to calm her racing heart. "Danny, whose room is that at the end of the hall?" "The one that's kept up." The boy's freckled face grew solemn. "That was Mrs. Lockhart's room, the boss's wife." "His wife?" Beatrice couldn't hide her surprise. "I didn't realize he was married." "Was," Danny corrected. "She died 'bout 2 years ago now, consumption." Beatrice felt a wave of sympathy for Grant. He never mentioned her. "He don't talk about her much," Danny said with a shrug. "But he keeps her room just like it was. Goes in there sometimes just to sit." He seemed to realize he was gossiping and quickly added, "I should get back to work. Hank'll be looking for this hammer." After Danny left, Beatrice stood in the hallway, processing this new information. A widower. That explained some of the sadness she sometimes glimpsed in Grant's eyes, the way he kept everyone at a distance. She felt a strange kinship with him. Then they were both haunted by their pasts, both trying to move forward while something kept pulling them back. When Grant returned that evening, he brought not only the coffee and cinnamon she'd requested, but also a small bottle of rosewater and a book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "Thought you might like these," he said gruffly, setting them on the kitchen table as she prepared dinner. "Mrs. Peterson suggested the rosewater, and I remembered seeing you look at this book in the store." Beatrice was touched by the unexpected gifts. "That's very kind of you." Grant shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just seemed like something a lady might appreciate." That night, after dinner was cleared away and the kitchen cleaned for the morning, Beatrice sat in her room with the small bottle of rosewater open on her dresser, its delicate scent filling the air as she read the poetry by lamplight. The gesture had been small but meaningful, an acknowledgement that she was more than just a housekeeper, that she was a person with desires and tastes of her own. It had been a long time since anyone had seen her that way. The following Sunday, her first true day off since arriving at the crescent moon, dawned clear and bright. After preparing a simple breakfast for the men, Beatrice decided to explore the ranch grounds. She changed from her work dress into the blue dress she'd worn that first day in town, and set out toward the small stream she'd seen from her window. The morning was beautiful, with a light breeze rustling through the cottonwoods and birds calling to one another overhead. The stream babbled pleasantly as she followed its winding course away from the ranch buildings. About a quarter-mile downstream, she discovered a small pool where the water widened and deepened, surrounded by willows that provided shade from the strengthening sun. The spot was so inviting that Beatrice couldn't resist removing her shoes and stockings and dipping her feet into the cool water. She closed her eyes, enjoying the sensation and the momentary peace it brought her. "It's my wife's favorite spot," came Grant's voice, startling her so badly she nearly fell into the water. He stood a few yards away, a fishing pole in one hand. "I'm sorry," he added. "I didn't mean to frighten you." "No, I'm sorry," Beatrice said, hastily pulling her feet from the water. "I didn't realize this was a private place." "It's not," Grant said, moving closer. "I just meant it was where Isabella liked to come and read or just sit." He paused, seeming surprised at himself for mentioning her. Beatrice hesitated, then decided to be direct. "Danny told me about your wife." "I'm very sorry for your loss." Grant's expression tightened momentarily, but then he nodded. "Thank you, it was difficult." He gestured to the spot beside her. "May I, of course?" He sat down, setting the fishing pole aside, and removed his own boots and socks, rolling up his trouser legs to dip his feet into the water alongside hers. They sat in silence for a while, watching the water flow past. "Sometimes I come here just to remember her," Grant said finally. "She was always so alive, so full of joy. Even when she got sick, she never complained, just kept finding beauty wherever she could." He glanced at Beatrice. "I don't talk about her much." "I understand," Beatrice said softly. "Some memories are too precious or too painful to share." "Or both," he agreed, studying her face. "You carry your own share of those, I think." Beatrice looked away, watching the ripples in the water. "We all have regrets, Mr. Lockhart." "Grant," he corrected gently. "Grant," she echoed, finding she liked the feel of his name on her lips. "What brings a woman like you back to a place like Copper Creek?" he asked, his tone curious rather than judgmental. Beatrice considered deflecting the question, as she had every time someone in town had asked something similar. But something about the quiet stream, the dappled sunlight, and Grant's own openness made her want to offer at least a piece of the truth. "I left here thinking I would become someone important," she said carefully. "I had dreams of being an actress, maybe even on the big stages in New York someday. San Francisco was just supposed to be the beginning." "And was it, in a way?" Beatrice sighed. "I did perform for a while, small parts in decent theaters at first, then smaller parts in less decent theaters, then—" She trailed off, not ready to share the worst of it. "Let's just say the life I found wasn't the one I'd imagined, and eventually I realized I needed to come back to start over." Grant was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. "Starting over isn't easy," he finally said, "but it's possible. I did it myself after Isabella died. I could barely function for months. The ranch almost failed. But then one day I just got up, fed the horses, fixed a fence, kept going." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Beatrice felt something stir in her chest, a warmth she'd almost forgotten could exist. "Sometimes," he continued, "the hardest part is forgiving yourself for what you couldn't change or control." The words hit her like a physical blow, so close to the heart of what she'd been struggling with. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back unexpected tears. Grant seemed to sense her distress and changed the subject. Do you know how to fish, Beatrice? Grateful for the diversion, she shook her head. My father tried to teach me once, but I was too impatient. Well, today seems like a good day to learn, he said, reaching for the fishing pole. If you're willing, I'd like that, she said softly. And so, on her first day off, Beatrice Rawlins found herself learning to fish from Grant Lockhart, a widowed rancher who understood more about starting over than anyone she'd ever met. By the time they returned to the ranch house with 3 small trout for dinner, something had changed between them. A tentative bridge had been built over the careful distance they'd been maintaining. That night, Beatrice wrote in her journal for the first time since returning to Copper Creek. The words came easier than they had in months. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back to the person she used to be, or perhaps to someone new, someone better, someone who had learned from her mistakes rather than been defined by them. As the weeks passed, life at the Crescent Moon settled into a comfortable rhythm. Beatrice's cooking improved, and the ranch hands began to look forward to meals rather than just enduring them. She added small touches to the house: wildflowers in mason jars, curtains she'd sewn for the kitchen windows, a crocheted throw for the parlor sofa. The ranch was beginning to feel like home in a way no place had since her father died. Her relationship with Grant evolved gradually. They began taking supper together in the dining room rather than him eating with the hands in the bunkhouse. Sometimes in the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset while he told her stories about the ranch, and she occasionally shared sanitized tales of her time in San Francisco. He never pressed when she glossed over details or changed the subject, and she extended him the same courtesy when memories of Isabella seemed to overwhelm him. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll in from the mountains, Grant turned to her with unusual seriousness. "Beatrice, there's a harvest dance in town next Saturday. Would you care to accompany me?" The invitation caught her off guard. She hadn't returned to town since arriving at the Crescent Moon nearly 2 months earlier, and the prospect of facing the gossip and stares was daunting. But the thought of attending as Grant's companion rather than alone made it seem almost possible. I'm not sure how welcome I'd be," she admitted, Grant's brow furrowed. "You're with me. No one would dare say a word against you." There was something protective in his tone that warmed her, even as it reminded her that he didn't know the full truth about her past. "Thank you," she said carefully. "But I think it might be better if I didn't go." Disappointment flickered across his face, quickly masked. "Of course, I understand." But he didn't understand, not really. And the realization that she was still hiding herself from him, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, filled her with sudden resolve. "Grant," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "there are things about me, about my time in San Francisco, that you don't know, things that would make those people's whispers seem justified." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious but open. "Beatrice, we all have pasts. Whatever happened in San Francisco—" "I was ruined," she interrupted, the words rushing out before she could lose her nerve. "Not just as an actress, but as a woman. When the acting jobs dried up, I worked in a place called the Gilded Cage. It wasn't just a saloon. The men paid for more than drinks." She couldn't meet his eyes as she continued. "I'm not proud of it, but I was desperate. And then I got involved with the owner, a man named James Blackwell. He was charming at first, generous, made me feel special again." The memory of James's smile, so beautiful and so false, still had the power to make her stomach clench. But he changed, or maybe he just showed his true nature. He was cruel, controlling. He hurt me, and he made me hurt others, cheat them, steal from them. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There was a man who killed himself after I helped James ruin him. That's when I knew I had to get away, no matter what. She finally looked up at Grant, expecting to see disgust or at least disappointment in his eyes. Instead, she found only compassion and a simmering anger that she instinctively knew wasn't directed at her. "Did this Blackwell let you go easily?" he asked, his voice controlled but tight. Beatrice shook her head. "No, I had to run in the night, take a different name for a while. I worked my way back east doing whatever honest work I could find, determined never to return to that life. When I finally felt safe enough to use my real name again, I decided to come back here. I had nowhere else to go." Grant was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed what she'd told him. Finally, he reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "It couldn't have been easy. You don't despise me?" Beatrice asked, barely able to voice the question. "Despise you?" Grant looked genuinely surprised. "Beatrice, you survived. You got yourself out of a terrible situation. You've been trying to build a new life. There's nothing in that story that makes me think less of you, quite the opposite." His words were like a balm to wounds she'd thought would never heal. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she didn't try to hide them. "About the dance," Grant continued, still holding her hand, "we don't have to go. But if you ever want to face that town again, I'd be proud to have you on my arm." "I'm ashamed of what I've become," she whispered, giving voice to the feeling that had haunted her since San Francisco. Grant reached out then, gently brushing away a tear with his thumb. "Then I'll remind you who you are," he whispered back. "You're Beatrice Rawlins. You're strong and kind and brave. You make the best apple pie in the territory, and you hum when you're kneading bread. You always make sure Danny eats enough vegetables, and you leave coffee on the stove for Hank when he has night watch. You're the woman who's brought light back into this house." Beatrice was overwhelmed by his words, by the tender way he saw her not as the fallen woman she believed herself to be, but as someone worthy of admiration and respect. "Thank you," she managed to say through her tears. Grant smiled, a soft, intimate expression she'd rarely seen from him. "No, thank you, for trusting me with your truth." They sat together in companionable silence as the storm rolled closer, lightning illuminating the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. When the first heavy drops began to fall, they moved inside, but something fundamental had changed between them. A wall had come down, allowing them to see each other more clearly, scars, regrets, hopes, and all. That night, Beatrice dreamt not of San Francisco or the gilded cage, but of dancing with Grant under an open sky full of stars. When she woke, she found herself smiling for no reason at all. The following Saturday, to everyone's surprise including her own, Beatrice decided to attend the harvest dance after all. She spent the day alternating between excitement and anxiety, pressing and repressing her best dress, the blue one that Grant had once complimented, and styling her hair in a simple but elegant arrangement. When she finally descended the stairs that evening, Grant was waiting in the foyer, dressed in a clean black suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. His eyes widened appreciably at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "You clean up rather nicely yourself." The ride to town was filled with nervous chatter on her part and reassurances on his. As they approached the outskirts of Copper Creek, Beatrice's anxiety intensified. "We don't have to stay long," Grant promised, sensing her discomfort. "Just one dance and we can leave if you wish." Beatrice took a deep breath and nodded. "One dance sounds perfect." The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with lanterns hanging from the rafters and harvest decorations adorning the walls. A small band played at one end of the room, and couples already filled the dance floor. When Beatrice entered on Grant's arm, there was a momentary lull in conversation as heads turned and whispers began. But then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Peterson, of all people, approached them with a welcoming smile. "Beatrice Rawlins, how lovely to see you again. And Mr. Lockhart, you've finally decided to join us for a social event. Will wonders never cease?" Her tone was warm, her eyes kind. Before Beatrice could respond, others came over to greet them. Mr. Peterson, the banker and his wife, even Sheriff Taylor and his daughter. Not everyone was friendly. There were still cold stares and turned backs, but enough people welcomed her that the knot in Beatrice's stomach began to loosen. "See," Grant murmured in her ear. "Not so terrible." When the band struck up a waltz, he led her onto the dance floor. Beatrice had learned to dance during her brief time on the stage, but she'd forgotten how pleasurable it could be with the right partner. Grant moved with surprising grace for such a large man, guiding her confidently around the floor, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "You dance beautifully," she said, looking up at him with new appreciation. A shadow of melancholy crossed his face. "Isabella loved to dance. We used to practice in the parlor." Instead of dampening the moment, the mention of his late wife felt like another gift of trust. Beatrice squeezed his hand gently. "She would be happy to see you dancing again, I think." Grant's eyes softened. Yes, she would. She wasn't the type to want anyone to mourn forever. As they continued to circle the floor, Beatrice became aware of someone watching them intently. A man stood near the refreshment table, tall and expensively dressed, with dark hair and a precisely trimmed mustache. There was something familiar about him that made her uneasy. "What's wrong?" Grant asked, noticing her distraction. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just someone I thought I recognized, but I must be mistaken." After the dance ended, Grant went to fetch them some punch. Beatrice stood near the wall, still trying to place the familiar-looking stranger, when a voice behind her made her blood run cold. "Well, if it isn't little B. Rawlins. I thought that was you." She turned slowly to find the man standing too close, his smile as predatory as she remembered. "James," she breathed, terror washing over her. "What are you doing here?" James Blackwell's smile widened. "Business, my dear. I'm expanding my interests eastward." Imagine my surprise when I heard a woman matching your description was working as a housekeeper for some rancher. He reached out to touch her cheek, and she flinched away. "You disappeared on me rather abruptly. I've missed you." "Leave me alone," Beatrice hissed, glancing around desperately for Grant. "I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, but I have plenty to say to you," James replied, his voice hardening though his smile remained. "For instance, I could tell your new employer all about your special talents at the Gilded Cage, how many men you entertained, how enthusiastic you could be for the right price." "That's enough," came Grant's deep voice from behind her. He stepped to Beatrice's side, handing her a cup of punch before turning his attention to James. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Grant, this is James Blackwell," Beatrice said, her voice shaking slightly. "From San Francisco." Grant's expression didn't change, but she felt him tense beside her. "Mr. Blackwell," he said coldly, "I understand you and Miss Rawlins are acquainted." "Oh, we're more than acquainted," James said with a smirk. "Aren't we, B? We're practically family, considering how long she lived under my roof enjoying my protection." Beatrice felt sick. "I never wanted your protection. You threatened me, controlled me." "Such dramatics," James laughed. "You always did have a flair for the theatrical." He turned to Grant. "She's quite the actress, Mr. Lockhart," Grant supplied, his voice dangerously even. "Grant Lockhart. Well, Mr. Lockhart, I wonder if you know exactly what kind of woman you've brought to this charming little event. The respectable people here might be interested to know, I think." Grant interrupted, stepping slightly forward, "that you should leave Miss Rawlins alone. Whatever relationship you had is clearly over by her choice." James's smile faded. "This doesn't concern you. She works for me. She's under my protection now. That makes it my concern." The two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Beatrice held her breath, painfully aware that people nearby had noticed the confrontation and were watching with undisguised interest. Finally, James stepped back, his expression calculating. "Very well, but our conversation isn't finished, B. I'm staying at the hotel for several days. Perhaps we can catch up properly, in private." The implication in his tone made her skin crawl. "I believe the lady has made her feelings clear," Grant said, his hand moving to rest protectively at Beatrice's waist. With a mocking tip of his hat, James turned and walked away, stopping to chat amiably with several townspeople as if nothing had happened. "Are you all right?" Grant asked quietly. Beatrice realized she was trembling. "I want to leave, please." Without hesitation, Grant led her out of the hall and to their waiting wagon. The ride back to the ranch was silent, Beatrice too shaken to speak and Grant respecting her need for quiet. Only when they reached the house did he finally break the silence. "That was him, wasn't it? The man who hurt you in San Francisco?" Beatrice nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I never thought he would find me here. I never imagined he would even look." "What does he want?" Grant asked, helping her down from the wagon. "I don't know," she shuddered. "Nothing good. James doesn't do anything unless it benefits him somehow." They went inside and Grant lit the lamps in the parlor. "Sit," he said gently. "I'll make some tea." While he was in the kitchen, Beatrice sank onto the sofa, her mind racing. Why had James come all this way? Was it really just coincidence that he had found her? And what would he do now? Grant returned with 2 cups of tea and sat beside her, close but not touching. "Tell me what you're afraid he'll do." Beatrice wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "He could ruin what little reputation I have here. He knows things, details about what I did in San Francisco, but that's not what scares me most." She looked up at Grant, fear plain in her eyes. "He's possessive. In his mind, I belong to him. I stole myself from him and he doesn't forgive theft. You think he might try to force you to return with him?" Grant's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Or worse," Beatrice whispered. "He has a temper. I've seen what happens to people who cross him." Grant set his tea aside untouched. "He won't touch you," he said firmly. "I won't let him." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Beatrice's heart swell even as fear continued to grip her. "Grant, you don't know what he's capable of. He has connections, dangerous people who do his bidding." "This isn't San Francisco," Grant reminded her. "This is my territory, and I've faced worse than men like James Blackwell." There was something in his tone that reminded Beatrice of the rumors Mrs. Holloway had mentioned that Grant had been a gunslinger before becoming a rancher. Looking at him now, his face hard with determination, those rumors seemed more plausible. "I won't let you put yourself in danger for me," she protested. "Maybe I should just leave, go somewhere else where he can't find me, and start over yet again, always looking over your shoulder." Grant shook his head. "No, Beatrice, it's time to stand your ground, and you won't be standing alone." His words touched something deep inside her, a strength she'd forgotten she possessed, a dignity she thought she'd lost forever in the gilded cage. "What do we do?" she asked. "First, you stay here at the ranch. Don't go into town alone. I'll speak with Sheriff Taylor tomorrow, let him know we have concerns about Blackwell." "The sheriff won't help," Beatrice said bitterly. "James hasn't done anything illegal, not here anyway, and the word of a woman like me won't count for much." "You'd be surprised," Grant countered. "Taylor's a good man, and he's got no love for outsiders who bring trouble to his town." They talked late into the night, making plans, considering options. By the time they finally retired to their rooms, Beatrice felt marginally better, still afraid, but no longer paralyzed by that fear. Grant's steady presence was like an anchor, keeping her from being swept away by panic. As she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same one who had stepped off the stagecoach months ago, beaten down, ashamed, barely holding together. This Beatrice stood straighter, her eyes clearer, her spirit stronger. "You're Beatrice Rawlins," she whispered to herself, echoing Grant's words from that night on the porch. "You're strong and kind and brave." For the first time in years, she almost believed it. The following morning, Grant rode into town to speak with Sheriff Taylor, leaving instructions with the hands to keep a close eye on the house and for Beatrice to stay inside. Hank stationed himself on the porch with a shotgun across his knees, looking almost pleased at the prospect of potential trouble. Beatrice tried to keep busy, cleaning rooms that were already spotless and baking enough bread to feed an army. By mid-afternoon, her nerves were stretched thin with waiting. When she heard horses approaching, she rushed to the window, relief flooding through her at the sight of Grant returning. The relief was short-lived, however, when she saw he wasn't alone. James Blackwell rode beside him, along with Sheriff Taylor and another man she didn't recognize. Heart pounding, she met them at the door. "What's happening?" she asked Grant, ignoring the others. "Mr. Blackwell has agreed to a civilized discussion," Grant said, his expression giving nothing away. "Sheriff Taylor is here to ensure everyone behaves appropriately." James dismounted with fluid grace, his city clothes and polished boots looking out of place against the rugged backdrop of the ranch. He greeted her with a cold smile. "Your Mr. Lockhart is quite persuasive. He suggested it would be better to settle our disagreement privately rather than involve the good people of Copper Creek any further." Sheriff Taylor, a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair, nodded to Beatrice. "Miss Rawlins, Mr. Lockhart explained that there might be some trouble. I'm here to make sure things stay civil." The fourth man, middle-aged with spectacles and a briefcase, introduced himself as Mr. Edwards, the town lawyer. Beatrice looked to Grant questioningly. He gave her a reassuring nod. "Please show these gentlemen to the parlor. I'll join you in a moment." While Grant spoke quietly to Hank outside, Beatrice led the others into the house. Her hands trembled as she offered refreshments which everyone but James declined. "Still playing the perfect hostess," James murmured when the others were engaged in conversation. "You always did know how to make men comfortable." "What do you want, James?" Beatrice asked quietly. "Why go to all this trouble to find me?" His smile never reached his eyes. "Perhaps I missed you, or perhaps you took something that belongs to me when you left." Before she could respond, Grant entered the room, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Gentlemen," he said, taking a seat beside Beatrice on the sofa, "let's get to the point. Mr. Blackwell believes he has some claim on Miss Rawlins. Miss Rawlins disagrees. I've asked you here, Sheriff Taylor, to witness that whatever arrangement existed between them in San Francisco has been terminated by Miss Rawlins's clear choice." James leaned back in his chair, deceptively relaxed. "It's not quite so simple, I'm afraid. B incurred certain debts during her time at the Gilded Cage. Room and board, clothing, jewelry all provided by me, with the understanding that she would repay my generosity." "That's a lie," Beatrice said, finding her voice at last. "You never mentioned any debt until now. You kept me there through threats and fear, not because I owed you anything." James shrugged. "A matter of perspective, perhaps, but I have ledgers showing the expenses." "Fabricated, no doubt," Grant interjected. "Even if such debts existed," Mr. Edwards spoke up, They would be difficult to enforce across state lines without proper documentation and contracts. "I'm not interested in legal proceedings," James said smoothly. "I merely want what's mine. Either B returns with me to San Francisco to work off her debt, or she can pay me the $5,000 she owes." $5,000, Beatrice gasped. "That's outrageous." "With interest," James added with a cold smile. Sheriff Taylor frowned. "Mr. Blackwell, that sounds suspiciously like extortion to me." "Not at all, Sheriff. Just a businessman collecting what he's owed." Grant had been watching the exchange with calculated calmness. Now he leaned forward. "What if I pay her debt?" Beatrice turned to him in shock. "Grant, no. You can't." He silenced her with a gentle touch to her hand. "What if I pay it?" he repeated to James. "Would that end this matter completely?" James studied him thoughtfully. "You'd pay $5,000 for her. She must be even more talented than I remembered." Grant's jaw tightened at the insinuation, but his voice remained steady. "I'm buying her freedom from harassment. Nothing more. Do we have an agreement?" James pretended to consider the offer, though Beatrice could tell from the gleam in his eyes that this had been his goal all along. "I suppose that would satisfy me. Cash, of course, and I'll need it before I leave town." "I can have 3,000 by tomorrow," Grant said. "The rest will take time to gather." 3,000 now, the rest within a month," James countered. "With a promissory note signed by you and Mr. Edwards here." Sheriff Taylor looked between them. "This all seems highly irregular." "But legal," James pointed out. "Simply a private agreement between gentlemen." Mr. Edwards cleared his throat. "If both parties are in agreement, I can draw up the necessary paperwork." Grant nodded. "We'll do it this way." "Grant, please," Beatrice whispered urgently. "You can't give him that kind of money. It's exactly what he wanted all along." "Trust me," Grant murmured back. "I know what I'm doing." The details were arranged with disturbing efficiency. James would come to the ranch the following day to collect the initial payment and sign the documents Mr. Edwards would prepare. Sheriff Taylor, still looking troubled by the whole affair, agreed to be present as a witness. After the men departed, Beatrice rounded on Grant. "How could you agree to his demands? $5,000 is a fortune, and you know he fabricated that debt entirely." Grant's expression remained calm. "Of course he did, but money is a small price to pay to be rid of him permanently." "Do you even have that kind of money?" she asked, suddenly worried about the ranch's financial stability. "I have enough," Grant said simply. "The ranch is doing well, and I've saved over the years." He took her hands in his. "Beatrice, I would pay 10 times that amount to ensure your peace of mind." His words left her speechless. No one had ever made such a sacrifice for her, certainly not without expecting something in return. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "Why would you do this for me?" Grant's eyes softened as he looked at her. "Because you deserve to be free. Because he stopped, something vulnerable crossing his face. "Because I care about you, Beatrice, more than I thought I could care about anyone after Isabella." The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with meaning and possibility. Beatrice's heart pounded as she realized what he was saying and what he wasn't saying yet. "I care about you too," she whispered, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling behind them. Grant squeezed her hands gently before releasing them. "Then let me do this. Let me help you close this chapter for good." Beatrice wanted to argue further, to refuse his generosity, but the determined set of his jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she nodded, overcome with gratitude and something else, something that felt dangerously like love. That night, she prayed for the first time in years, asking not for herself but for Grant's protection and for the wisdom to be worthy of such a man. The following day passed in a haze of tension as they waited for James and the others to arrive. Grant had ridden into town early to withdraw money from the bank, returning with a heavy saddlebag and a grim expression. By mid-afternoon, the expected party appeared, and the business was conducted with cold efficiency in the parlor. James counted the money meticulously, while Mr. Edwards explained the promissory note. Sheriff Taylor watched the proceedings with evident distaste, but said nothing. "Everything appears to be in order," James finally said, tucking the money into his own saddlebag. He looked at Beatrice with a smile that made her skin crawl. "It seems your value has increased since San Francisco, my dear. I almost regret letting you go." "The agreement," Mr. Edwards reminded him firmly, "includes a clause stating that you will make no further claims on Miss Rawlins and will not contact her again." James sighed dramatically. "Yes, yes, our business is concluded." He stood, offering his hand to Grant. "A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Lockhart." Grant ignored the outstretched hand. "Just go, Blackwell, and don't come back to Copper Creek." James's smile hardened. "Such hostility. One might almost think you don't trust me." "I don't," Grant said flatly. With a shrug, James collected his things and moved toward the door. He paused beside Beatrice. "Goodbye, Bea. I do hope you found what you were looking for here in this charming wilderness." His gaze flickered to Grant and back to her. "Though I wonder if he'll still want you once the novelty wears off." Before anyone could respond, he was gone, the sound of his horse's hooves fading as he rode away. Sheriff Taylor approached Beatrice. "Miss Rawlins, if he troubles you again, you come straight to me." "Agreement or no agreement, I don't take kindly to extortion in my town." "Thank you, Sheriff," she said, touched by his support. After the sheriff and Mr. Edwards departed, Beatrice found herself alone with Grant. The tension that had sustained her throughout the confrontation suddenly drained away, leaving her light-headed and weak-kneed. She sank onto the sofa, trembling. "It's over," Grant said, sitting beside her. "He's gone." "For now," Beatrice whispered. "But what about when the rest of the money is due? He'll be back." Grant's expression was unreadable. "You let me worry about that." "I can't let you give him more money," she insisted. "It's too much, Grant. The ranch will be fine," he assured her. "And so will you, I promise." Despite his confidence, Beatrice couldn't shake the feeling that James wouldn't be satisfied with just money. He was a man who needed to win, to dominate. The fact that she had escaped him once already was an insult he wouldn't easily forgive, agreement or no agreement. Her fears proved prescient sooner than she could have imagined. 3 days later, as Beatrice was hanging laundry in the yard, she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw James Blackwell riding toward the house, accompanied by 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. Heart racing, she dropped the laundry and ran inside, calling for Grant. But he had ridden out early that morning to check on the herd and wasn't expected back until evening. Only Danny was nearby, mucking out the stables. "Danny," she called urgently from the back door. "Ride for Mr. Lockhart. Tell him James Blackwell is here with 2 men. Hurry." The boy's eyes widened with alarm, but he didn't waste time asking questions. He was on a horse and galloping away from the back of the property before James and his companions reached the front yard. Beatrice closed and locked the doors, then retrieved the shotgun Grant kept in the kitchen. Her hands shook as she loaded it the way he had shown her. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she would not be taken without a fight. A heavy knock sounded at the front door. "Bea," James called, his voice deceptively pleasant. "I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk." She remained silent, moving to the window to peer through the curtains. James stood on the porch, looking relaxed and amused. His companions, one tall and lean, the other stocky and bearded, remained mounted, their expressions bored but watchful. "This is childish, Bea," James continued when she didn't respond. "I've come to offer you a better arrangement than the one your Mr. Lockhart negotiated." It would be in your best interest to hear me out." Still, Beatrice said nothing, praying that Danny would find Grant quickly. James's voice hardened. "Very well, if you won't be reasonable." He nodded to his men. The bearded one dismounted and moved toward the back of the house, while the tall one circled toward the side. They were going to force their way in. Beatrice's mouth went dry with terror. She moved to the foot of the stairs, positioning herself where she could see both the front and back doors. The shotgun felt impossibly heavy in her hands. A window shattered in the kitchen, and she heard someone climbing through. From the front, the sound of splintering wood as James or his man attempted to break down the door. "Stay back," she shouted, raising the shotgun. "I'm armed." A harsh laugh came from the kitchen. "Hear that, boss? The little lady's got a gun." "Be careful, Jenkins," James called back. "We want her unharmed." The bearded man, Jenkins, appeared in the kitchen doorway, a pistol in his hand. "Put it down, sweetheart. You ain't gonna shoot nobody." Beatrice felt herself trembling but kept the shotgun aimed at his chest. "Don't come any closer." Jenkins grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Or what? You'll shoot me. You ever kill a man before, girl?" "No," Beatrice admitted, her voice steadier than she felt. "But there's a first time for everything." Something in her tone must have given him pause, because his grin faltered slightly. Before either of them could move, the front door burst open, and James strode in, followed by the tall man. "Enough of this, B," James said, brushing splinters from his expensive coat. "Put down the gun before someone gets hurt." "What do you want?" Beatrice demanded, keeping the shotgun raised. "We had an agreement." James smiled coldly. "I've reconsidered. $3,000 is insufficient compensation for what you've cost me. But I'm willing to forgive the remaining debt if you return with me to San Francisco. I have a new establishment there much more exclusive than the Gilded Cage. Your experience would be valuable." "Never," Beatrice spat. "I'll die first." "So dramatic," James sighed. "No one's talking about dying, though I can't speak for your Mr. Lockhart if he tries to interfere again." He gestured to his men. "Lewis, Jenkins, help Miss Rawlins pack her things. We'll be leaving immediately." As the men moved toward her, Beatrice backed up the stairs, the shotgun still trained on them. "Stay back," she warned again, her finger tightening on the trigger. Jenkins laughed. "She ain't gonna shoot. Women ain't got the stomach for it." He was wrong. As he lunged for her, Beatrice pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening in the confined space, the recoil nearly knocking her off her feet. Jenkins howled in pain, clutching his shoulder where the shot had grazed him. "You bitch," he snarled, blood seeping between his fingers. James's expression darkened with rage. "Enough games. Lewis, get her." The tall man started up the stairs, but Beatrice was already retreating, trying desperately to reload the shotgun as she had seen Grant do. Her hands were shaking too badly, and she fumbled with the cartridges. Lewis reached her before she could finish, wrenching the weapon from her grasp and tossing it aside. He grabbed her arm roughly. "Come on, lady. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Beatrice fought, kicking and scratching, but Lewis was far stronger. He dragged her down the stairs, pinning her arms behind her back when they reached the bottom. James approached, his face a mask of cold fury. He raised his hand and slapped her hard across the face, the force of the blow making her ears ring and her vision blur. "That," he said softly, "was for shooting my man. And this," he raised his hand again. "Touch her again and you're dead." Everyone froze at the sound of Grant's voice. He stood in the doorway, a rifle aimed steadily at James's head. Behind him, Hank and Miguel appeared, both armed. "Lockhart," James said, recovering quickly, "this doesn't concern you anymore. Our agreement is void." "Let her go," Grant ordered, his voice deadly calm. Now James smiled thinly. "I think not. In fact, I believe we'll be taking Miss Rawlins with us regardless of your objections." He gestured subtly, and Beatrice felt something cold and hard press against her temple. Lewis had drawn his pistol. "Drop the rifle," Lewis called, "or I'll put a bullet in her pretty head." Time seemed to slow down. Beatrice saw Grant's eyes narrow, calculating. She saw the slight movement of his finger on the trigger, saw Hank and Miguel spreading out to either side, their own weapons ready. In that moment, with death so close she could feel its cold breath on her skin, Beatrice found a clarity she'd never known before. She knew exactly who she was and what she wanted, and it wasn't to die on the floor of Grant Lockhart's house, a pawn in James Blackwell's twisted game of control. With a sudden, violent movement, she drove her elbow into Lewis's stomach and ducked as he doubled over in pain. The pistol discharged, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling as she threw herself to the floor. What followed was chaos. Gunshots echoed through the house as Grant and his men exchanged fire with James and Jenkins. Beatrice crawled behind the staircase, trying to make herself as small as possible as splinters of wood and plaster rained down around her. She heard a cry of pain, a string of curses, more gunfire. Then, suddenly, silence. "Beatrice," Grant's voice tense with worry. "Beatrice, are you hurt?" She peered out from behind the stairs. Grant stood in the center of the room, rifle still in hand, his expression frantic as he searched for her. On the floor near the door, Jenkins lay motionless, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Lewis was slumped against the wall, clutching his leg and moaning. Of James, there was no sign. "I'm here," she called, crawling out from her hiding place. "I'm not hurt." Grant rushed to her side, helping her to her feet, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders as if to reassure himself that she was truly unharmed. His face was pale, his eyes wild with fear and something else, something deeper and more powerful. "Where's James?" she asked, looking around anxiously. "He ran," Hank said from the doorway, his weathered face grim. "Miguel's after him, but he had a head start." Grant's expression hardened. "Take care of her," he said to Hank, gently transferring Beatrice into the older man's care. "I'm going after Blackwell." "Grant, no." Beatrice grabbed his arm. "Let him go, please, it's not worth more bloodshed." "He'll come back," Grant said grimly. "As long as he's alive, he'll keep coming for you." "We'll be ready," Hank said. "Sheriff Taylor will have something to say about this attack, too." "Blackwell won't get away with it." Grant hesitated, torn between his desire to end the threat permanently and his reluctance to leave Beatrice after what had just happened. Finally, he nodded. "Tie him up," he told Hank, nodding toward the wounded Lewis. "I'll take Beatrice to town. We'll get Sheriff Taylor and a doctor." As Grant helped her into the wagon a few minutes later, Beatrice was still shaking from the ordeal. "I shot him," she whispered, the reality of what she had done finally sinking in. "I could have killed him." "You defended yourself," Grant said firmly. "You were incredibly brave." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I was terrified." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid," Grant told her, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. "It means you act despite your fear." As they rode toward town, Beatrice leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. The events of the day had shown her something important, that she was stronger than she'd believed, capable of fighting for her freedom, her dignity, her very life. James had tried to reduce her to nothing, to make her believe she was nothing without him. But she had proved him wrong. She had proved herself wrong, too. She wasn't the broken woman who had stepped off the stagecoach all those months ago. She was Beatrice Rawlins, strong and kind and brave. And she was in love with Grant Lockhart. Sheriff Taylor was appropriately outraged when they told him what had happened. He immediately organized a posse to search for James. though Miguel had already returned to the ranch with the news that Blackwell had managed to reach town and presumably the stagecoach or train. "He won't get far," the sheriff promised. "I'll send telegraphs to every town between here and California. He'll be arrested for attempted kidnapping and assault the minute he shows his face." A doctor was sent to the ranch to tend to Lewis, who would survive his wound only to face trial and likely prison. Jenkins had not been so fortunate. His body was taken to the undertaker's. The town, which had viewed Beatrice with suspicion and judgment upon her return, now rallied around her. Mrs. Peterson brought food. Mr. Edwards offered legal assistance. Even Mrs. Holloway visited, bringing a quilt and words of support. "It's strange," Beatrice said to Grant as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset after a day of answering questions and cleaning up the mess left by the attack. "A month ago, most of these people wouldn't have spoken to me on the street. Now they're bringing casseroles." Grant smiled slightly. "People respect courage, and they love a good story to tell. Did you hear about Miss Rawlins? Held off 3 armed men with a shotgun," he mimicked Mrs. Peterson's gossipy tone. "You'll be a local legend by Sunday." Beatrice laughed, the sound surprising her after the tension of the day. "Hardly the kind of fame I dreamed of as a girl. But perhaps a better kind," Grant suggested. "Earned through strength rather than artifice." They fell silent, watching as the sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Beatrice was acutely aware of Grant beside her, of how close she had come to losing the peace of the ranch, the beauty of the sunset, the chance to sit beside this man who had risked everything to protect her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. Not just today, but for giving me a place here, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Grant turned to look at her, his green eyes serious in the fading light. "Beatrice, he stopped, seeming to search for the right words. "When I saw Lewis holding that gun to your head, I realized something. I realized that losing you would destroy me, that somewhere along the way, without me even noticing, you've become essential to my happiness." Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. "Grant." He took her hands in his. "I know it might be too soon. I know you're still healing from today, from everything that came before. But I need you to know that I love you, not as my housekeeper or as someone I need to protect, but as the remarkable woman you are." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a long time, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself. I didn't think I deserved happiness or love after everything I'd done." "We all deserve a second chance," Grant said, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I found mine when you stepped into my house and brought light back into my life after Isabella's death. Maybe you can find yours here with me." Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tender and respectful, but with a depth of feeling that made Beatrice's heart soar. When they finally parted, she felt as though something broken inside her had begun to mend. "Stay with me," Grant murmured. "Not as my housekeeper, but as my partner, my love. Eventually, if you'll have me as my wife." Beatrice smiled through her tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, planning their future together, both acutely aware of how precious and unexpected this second chance at happiness was. 2 weeks later, a telegram arrived from San Francisco. James Blackwell had been arrested upon his return to the city, not for his actions in Copper Creek, though those charges were pending, but for embezzlement and fraud related to his business dealings at the Gilded Cage. It seemed that in his obsession with finding Beatrice, he had neglected his affairs, and certain irregularities had come to light. "He'll be in prison for years," Grant said after reading the telegram. "You're truly free of him now." Beatrice felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a weight she had carried for so long that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to stand straight and unburdened. "Free," she repeated, savoring the word. "To live the life I choose." That Sunday, Beatrice and Grant attended church together in Copper Creek. There were still a few raised eyebrows and whispered comments, but most of the townspeople greeted them warmly. After the service, Grant surprised her by leading her to the front of the church, where Reverend Simmons waited with a Bible in hand. "What are you doing?" Beatrice asked, suddenly nervous as she realized everyone was watching them. Grant smiled. "I thought, if you're willing, we might make our intentions official. Right here, in front of everyone who matters in this community." Her heart swelled with love for this man who understood, without her having to explain, how important it was to her to be accepted, to belong somewhere again. "I'm willing," she said, her voice clear and confident. Reverend Simmons beamed at them. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today to witness the engagement of Grant Lockhart and Beatrice Rawlins." The announcement was brief but meaningful. When Grant slipped a ring onto her finger, Isabella's ring, which Beatrice had found in that wooden box all those months ago, and which Grant had assured her his late wife would have wanted her to have, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. "Mrs. Lockhart," Grant whispered as they walked down the aisle together afterward, her hand tucked securely in the crook of his arm. "Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Beatrice looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible that it could be contained within her chest. "The nicest," she agreed. They were married a month later in the garden of the Crescent Moon Ranch, with wildflowers in bloom all around them and the mountains standing witness in the distance. Sheriff Taylor gave the bride away. Hank and Miguel served as groomsmen. Even Danny had a special role, carrying the rings on a small cushion sewn by Mrs. Peterson. As Beatrice spoke her vows, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the mistakes, the regrets, the shame, but also the courage, the resilience, the love. She thought about the words Grant had whispered to her that night on the porch when she had confessed her deepest shame. "Then I'll remind you who you are." He had done exactly that. He had helped her remember the woman she had been before life had beaten her down, and he had loved her through the process of becoming something new and stronger, a woman who knew her own worth, who could stand tall in the face of danger, who could love deeply without fear. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Simmons declared. "You may kiss the bride." As Grant's lips met hers, sealing their union before God and their community, Beatrice felt a profound sense of homecoming. She had traveled so far, physically and emotionally, only to find that what she had been seeking all along was not fame or fortune, but this love, acceptance, purpose, peace. The party that followed was joyous, with food and music and dancing that continued well into the night. As the celebration wound down, Grant took Beatrice's hand and led her away from the revelry, toward the small pool by the stream where they had first begun to know each other truly. The moon was full overhead, turning the water to silver and casting long shadows from the willows. Grant wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against his chest, content beyond words. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. Grant turned her in his arms so that they were face to face. "I want you to know something," he said, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I'm not trying to make you forget your past. It's part of you, part of what made you the woman I love. I just want to help you see that it doesn't define you, not unless you let it." Beatrice reached up to touch his face, marveling at the gift she had been given in this man who saw her so clearly and loved her so completely. "I understand that now," she said. My past is a chapter in my story, but it's not the whole book. We're writing new chapters now together." "Many, many chapters," Grant agreed, pulling her closer. "A lifetime of them." As they kissed beneath the moon and stars, Beatrice Rawlins Lockhart knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The shame that had once consumed her had been replaced by pride in her strength and gratitude for her second chance. She was Beatrice Lockhart, now wife, partner, survivor, and she was finally, truly free. Over the following year, the Crescent Moon Ranch flourished under the combined care of Grant and Beatrice. With her head for numbers and his knowledge of ranching, they expanded their operations, adding more cattle and hiring additional hands. The house, already comfortable, became truly a home with Beatrice's touch curtains at every window, flowers in season, the smell of fresh bread and pies often wafting from the kitchen. They developed a routine that suited them both. Mornings were for work, Grant with the cattle and horses, Beatrice managing the household and keeping the books. Afternoons often found them working side by side, whether mending fences or planning the next cattle drive. Evenings were their special time, reading together in the parlor or sitting on the porch watching the sunset, talking about everything and nothing. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts that threatened the herd, winter storms that isolated the ranch for weeks, the normal challenges of building a life together. But they faced each obstacle as a team, growing stronger through adversity rather than being diminished by it. News came from San Francisco that James Blackwell had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for his crimes. The letter from the prosecutor assured Beatrice that, with good behavior, the earliest he could be released would be in 10 years. The threat he had represented faded from their daily thoughts, though Beatrice knew she would never completely forget what he had done, both the harm and, inadvertently, the push that had sent her back to Copper Creek and into Grant's life. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Beatrice discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled them both with joy and a touch of trepidation. Grant became even more protective, insisting she rest more and delegate household tasks that he deemed too strenuous. Beatrice humored him to a point, but refused to be treated as an invalid. "This baby is going to be born to a strong, capable mother," she told him firmly when he objected to her helping in the garden. "Not to a hothouse flower who wilts at the first sign of exertion." Grant had laughed and conceded the point, though he still watched her like a hawk when she was on the porch ladder hanging new curtains. Their daughter, Isabella Rose Lockhart, was born on a crisp autumn morning as the first snowflakes of the season drifted past the bedroom window. She had her father's startling green eyes and her mother's determined spirit, evident from her first lusty cries. Holding his daughter for the first time, Grant wept unashamedly. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching the tiny fingers that curled instinctively around his large one. Just like her mother. Beatrice, exhausted but radiant, watched the two loves of her life bond in that moment and felt a completeness that surpassed anything she had ever known. The circle that had begun when Grant had helped her reclaim herself had expanded to include this new life, this continuation of their love. As Isabella grew from infant to toddler to little girl, the ranch grew as well. Grant purchased additional land, increasing their holdings until the Crescent Moon was one of the largest and most prosperous ranches in the territory. Beatrice started a small school on the property, initially just for their daughter but eventually including the children of their ranch hands, and even some from neighboring properties. The town of Copper Creek, once a place of painful memories and judgment for Beatrice, became simply the place where they conducted business and attended social gatherings. The whispers about her past had long since faded, replaced by respect for the educated, capable woman who stood as an equal partner to one of the area's most successful ranchers. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Grant surprised Beatrice with a journey a proper honeymoon, he called it, though it came years after their wedding. They traveled by train to New York, where they attended the theater, fulfilling a dream Beatrice had once had in a very different way, dined in fine restaurants, and walked through Central Park arm in arm like any other fashionable couple. One evening, as they dressed for a performance at the renowned Metropolitan Opera House, Beatrice paused before the mirror, struck by the woman who looked back at her. She wore a gown of deep blue silk, her hair arranged elegantly, a string of pearls Grant's anniversary gift around her neck. But it was her eyes that caught her attention, clear, confident, at peace. "You look beautiful," Grant said, coming to stand behind her, handsome in his formal evening wear. "But then you always do." "I was just thinking," Beatrice replied, meeting his gaze in the mirror, "about how far we've come. From that day I stepped off the stagecoach, so certain my life was over, to this moment." Grant's arms encircled her waist, and he pressed a kiss to her bare shoulder. "Your life wasn't over," he reminded her. "It was just beginning." "Thanks to you," she said, turning in his arms to face him directly. "No," Grant shook his head. "Thanks to you, Beatrice. You're the one who found the courage to leave San Francisco, to start over, to trust me, to love me. You're the one who stood up to Blackwell with nothing but a shotgun and your own determination. You're the one who created this life with me, who gave me our beautiful daughter, who makes every day worth living." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes at his words, but they were the tears of a woman who knew herself loved beyond measure. "We created this life together," she corrected gently. "And I wouldn't change a moment of it, not even the hard parts. They brought us here." Later that night, as they returned to their hotel after the opera, Beatrice thought about the young woman she had been, stepping onto a stagecoach bound for San Francisco with stars in her eyes and dreams of fame in her heart. How could she have known that true fulfillment would come not from adoring crowds but from the love of one good man, from the trust of their child, from the respect of their community, from the satisfaction of building something lasting and meaningful together? Back at the Crescent Moon, Isabella waited for them, cared for by Mrs. Peterson, who had become like a grandmother to her. The little girl's letters, dictated to Mrs. Peterson and written in the older woman's careful hand, were filled with tales of the ranch, the animals, and how much she missed her parents but was being very brave and good. "She's going to be remarkable," Beatrice said to Grant as they read the latest letter together in their hotel room. "Strong, independent, fearless." "Like her mother," Grant agreed with a smile. Beatrice shook her head, though she was pleased by the comparison. "Better than me. She'll never doubt her worth or her place in the world. She'll never have to find her way back to herself, because she'll never lose sight of who she is in the first place." "And who is she?" Grant asked, genuinely interested in Beatrice's vision for their daughter. "She's Isabella Rose Lockhart," Beatrice said with certainty. "She's the daughter of Grant and Beatrice, the granddaughter of my father and your parents and your first Isabella. She's the future of the Crescent Moon Ranch, and she's her own person with her own path to forge." She smiled. "But always with the knowledge that she is loved, absolutely and unconditionally, no matter what choices she makes or where life takes her." Grant pulled Beatrice close, overwhelmed by the wisdom and love of the woman he had married. "When did you get so wise?" he murmured against her hair. "Oh, I've had an excellent teacher," Beatrice replied, snuggling into his embrace. "A certain rancher who once told me that he'd remind me who I am." "And did he?" Grant asked. "Did he succeed?" Beatrice looked up at him, her eyes shining with love and contentment. "Beyond his wildest dreams," she assured him. "Beyond mine, too." As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, Beatrice's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude. She had traveled a long, difficult road to reach this place of peace and happiness. There had been moments when she had nearly lost herself completely, when shame and regret had threatened to consume her. But she had found her way back to herself, to love, to a life more fulfilling than any she could have imagined. She was Beatrice Lockhart, wife, mother, teacher, rancher's partner. Strong and kind and brave. And she was, at long last, exactly where she was meant to be.